Hello, everyone. Welcome to the IETF 108 Administrative and Operations Plenary. My name is Alyssa Cooper, and I'm the chair of the IETF. And thank you for joining us for the plenary. Next slide, please. So I know most of you have been joining sessions already all week, so you are experts in our online meeting platform, MeetEcho. But just a few reminders that you should have your video and audio off until you join the queue. Later, when we have the open mic sessions, we'll be running the queue as normal from same process as the working group sessions. Please only send audio when you're recognized in the queue, and then turn it off when you're finished. And state your name and affiliation when you're recognized. And we strongly recommend a headset if you have one. You can check out the participant meeting guide for more details. Next slide, please. So our agenda for today, we'll have a brief welcome and appreciation, and then some updates from myself, from Miria for the IAB, Colin for the IRTF, Barbara for the NomCom, and Jay and Jason will provide an IETF LLC update. Next slide, please. And then we'll have the 3 open microphone sessions, first for the Administration LLC, then for the IESG, and finally for the IAB. Next. So first, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to our meeting host, Erickson. This is not obviously our typical meeting, and we've been incredibly thankful to have the ongoing support of Erickson, even though we couldn't all get together in Madrid this time, and it's just been great to have their continued support, even though we had to change format. So big thanks to Erickson for serving as our host and for being one of our global hosts. Next. I also wanted to thank everybody who's come together as a team to help make this meeting happen, and that includes the Secretariat, the MeetEcho team, the NOC team, the LLC staff, the tools team, and the folks at gather.town. A large number of people who came together to provide us with the tools that we needed in order to be able to meet in this format and make everything work and be just incredibly responsive to the many corner cases and detailed needs that our community has. So it's been a great effort. Thank you very much. Next. So I'm just going to give a brief report from myself and the IESG. Next. 3 topics today. The first one is participant statistics. The next one is about planning for future meetings. And then I'll touch on some changes that we're anticipating for the BOF request process from between now and IETF 109. Next. So here at IETF 108, we have 1,051 on-site participants. That's people who have registered for the meeting. Last week, we ran the hackathon mostly asynchronously, and we had 295 hackathon registrations. So both of those numbers are pretty close to what we normally get for an in-person meeting, which is nice. Because of the nature of this meeting, that we still have people who can register during the week and show up, and we didn't want to give only a partial attendance report. We will be publishing the detailed attendance statistics after the meeting is over. So the normal country breakdowns and other details that we normally provide will be published after the meeting. So you can look out for those announced on email. Next. So this brings us to future meeting planning, and there's a few items I wanted to highlight here. In terms of short-term planning, like feedback for IETF 109, there's a couple of different mechanisms that we're using for feedback. For the tooling, okay. Can somebody verify that my audio is audible?
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay, sorry, I was just silently had my audio and video revoked. So, so for reporting issues in real time with respect to MeetEcho, oh, thanks. You can use the tickets email address, and those will be tracked. And there's a URL on our reporting page where you can go see all the tickets. And for Jabber, there's the mtd@ietf.org address. So that's like if you're having difficulty during the meeting, please file a ticket and you will get a response. If you, oh, let's stick on short-term planning, yeah. So if you have more longer-term feature requests for the platform, please take those to Tools Discuss. There's already robust discussion over there about features that people would like to see, things that people don't like, and so on. Please be respectful, but share your feedback about the tools on Tools Discuss. And that's anything to do with the MeetEcho platform or the data tracker integration. For other planning aspects, for IETF 109, we're planning to use the same assessment criteria that we used last time to make a decision about whether we can run the meeting in person versus online. Planning to use the same meeting fee structure as well, but these are open for consultation right now. So if you have input about those choices, please send that to manycouches@ietf.org, and we'll take the feedback in and adjust if we need to. And Many Couches is also the place where we're going to be gathering feedback about agenda planning for IETF 109. So Many Couches is the list to use. The other really important way that people can provide feedback is by filling out the IETF 108 meeting survey, which will be circulated after the meeting closes. We got a great response last time to the meeting survey, and it's really our only way of getting structured feedback to guide our decisions about how we plan the meetings. So if you have strong opinions about how the meetings should be organized or whether we should have meetings at all, that kind of thing, please fill out the meeting survey once it gets circulated. And then finally, we've set out a timeline for decision making for IETF 109. And we've said that August 31 is the date when we will be announcing whether 109 will be an in-person meeting or an online meeting and what the fee structure will be for that meeting. So now you can plan a little bit. For longer term planning, we also have a few activities going on. So we have a new working group, Stay Home, Meet Only Online, or SHMOO. And SHMOO is going to be working on guidelines for a number of different aspects. How do we decide about making in-person meeting cancellations? How do we plan for certain high-level aspects of the meeting if we do take it fully online? We're going to be talking about functional technology requirements, the meeting fees, the cadence of meetings, all of that good stuff. So if this is something that you're interested in, again, if this is a place where you have constructive suggestions for what we should do or what the guidelines should say that can guide the IESG and the IETF LLC as we do the meeting planning, then please join the mailing list, write a draft, come to the meeting, which is happening on Friday, this Friday at 11 UTC. We also have an activity going on where the current focus of the discussion is in the Gen Dispatch Working Group, and this relates to NomCom eligibility updates, in part motivated by the fact that our current NomCom eligibility criteria rely on in-person meetings, and that's obviously creating difficulty. So we put in sort of a short-term fix for the NomCom cycle this year, but we need something that is more long-lasting that can deal with the 2020 year, which is obviously shaping up to be quite different from every other year. So if that's something that is of interest to you, please read the draft and come to the Gen Dispatch meeting, which will be tomorrow at 1300 UTC. Next slide, please. So this we circulated to the IETF mailing list yesterday, but I wanted to get it in front of people because it has a new deadline in it. So we're changing the process a little bit for birds of a feather requests. We're experimenting with a change in process in this next cycle. So what we're asking is that by September 18th, that we want to hear from BOF proponents. The IESG would like to hear from BOF proponents if you're planning to propose a BOF. You don't have to have your complete proposal done by September 18th, but please send email to the IESG and post an entry in the BOF wiki by that date if you are even thinking about proposing a BOF. And then we're going to take the 2 weeks after that to have the ADs work with the proponents to refine their proposals. What we found in past cycles is that we're really time crunched between the deadline when we ask for the complete proposals and when we have to approve or decline them for scheduling purposes. So we're trying to give ourselves a little bit more time to work with the community to make the proposals better and hopefully get more high quality BOF scheduled. So we're going to take 2 weeks to do that, and then October 2 is the deadline for complete requests to be posted to the BOF wiki, and that's the same deadline that was previously announced in the important dates, and we'll take a week to figure out which ones we approve for scheduling. So that's a bit of a change, and hopefully the extra time will help us have a better BOF slate next time. Next slide, please. So there's more information covered online. We've had 2 appeals in the last cycle. You can go read both the appeals and the response text, and there's lots more reports from many of the other groups involved in the IETF that you can find on the meeting materials page. And we post semi-regular updates to the IETF blog as well. Next. And I will turn it over to Miria for the IAB update.
Yeah, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Given this is such an odd time for some people, I will keep it very brief. If we go to the next slide. Yeah, that's kind of the same slide. So one more. Yeah, so we already submitted the IAB report with all the reporting on the more administrative tasks to the proceedings of this meeting. So you can just go there and have a look and read everything. But I would like to use the opportunity to also cover some of the new and ongoing things we are doing in the IETF. And this is 3 things: the IB Open meeting we held yesterday already, some upcoming program proposal and workshop, and a quick thanks to everybody who serves as an appointee. Let's go on the next slide. Yes, so yesterday we had a new thing, which is called the IB Open meeting. It already happened yesterday. You can watch the recordings, but the idea here really was just to provide a forum for more interaction with the community from like 2 angles. One thing is we want to provide information to the community about the things we are doing right now in the IAB, focusing on the technical and architectural work we do in the IAB. And then we would also like to use this forum to get input from the community on the work we are doing and have some more interactive communication than we could have on a mailing list or somewhere else. So what we had yesterday was discussing a couple of IAB drafts, or one actually only workshops and programs. You can check the agenda. And if you have any feedback on this session, please send it directly to us, to the IAB at IAB@IAB.org, or you can also use the architecture discuss list for any public discussion with the community and with us. Of course, we're also on the list. I believe generally people found this positive, but I'm happy to hear more feedback. Next slide. Then about some ongoing efforts I would like to highlight. One thing is that we're currently discussing a new program on evaluability, deployability, and maintainability. So you can also find more information in the slides from the IAB Open meeting, but we already created a mailing list to have more discussion on that. So that's one thing you want to know about maybe. And the other thing is a quick announcement for a workshop we are planning for November. This workshop will be virtual, and it's covering things we want to discuss based on the crisis we've been seeing right now, where we see like this increase in network traffic. So it's about measurements, about operational practice. We will very soon send out a call for contributions, so that gives you more information, but there's also more information in the slides from the IAB Open meeting yesterday already. Next slide. And with that, I just want to say quickly thank you to everybody who's serving in an appointed position, but also everybody who put their name in and was potentially not appointed, and also everybody who provided feedback. We really need support here, and that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
You can switch to Colin.
Hi, My name is Colin Perkins. I'm the IRTF chair. If you go to the next slide, please. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so the IRTF is the research arm of the IETF. It's here to do research rather than develop standards. The IRTF is organized as a set of research groups. The slide lists the set of active research groups we have. Those in blue are meeting this week. I think most of them are already. I think only the computation and network group is still to meet. But do look out for the meetings and please do participate. If you're not familiar with the way that IRTF works and how it differs from the IETF, we also have RFC 7418, which talks about the differences between the organizations and provides a primer for the IETF participants. Next slide, please. In addition to the research groups, the IRTF organizes a bunch of other activities. One of the most important of those is the Applied Networking Research Workshop. This is an academic research workshop that we organize in conjunction with ACM SIGCOM. This year it's happening tomorrow and Friday, co-located with the IETF and running alongside all the IETF and IRTF meetings. The chairs of the workshop are Miria and Roland this year. They've done a really good job putting together a really interesting program. If you look at the URL on the slide, you'll find all the papers, links to all the papers on that website. Papers are all available open access in the ACM Digital Library, and I would very much encourage you to have a look, read the papers, and consider joining the sessions later in the week. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we also organized the Applied Networking Research Prize. The Applied Networking Research Prize is something we do in conjunction with the Internet Society, with sponsorship from Comcast and NBC Universal. And it's awarded for recent results in applied networking research that are relevant potentially for transitioning into shipping products and related standards efforts. There were 3 ANRP prize-winning talks yesterday from Bano, talking about her work on developing a taxonomy of internet liveness. Chao Yi talking about DNS over encryption with some measurements of DNS over TLS and DNS over HTTPS. And from Ingmar talking about traffic engineering and steering hypergiant traffic. 3 really nice talks. I'd encourage you to watch the recordings, which are on the IETF YouTube channel. In addition, the nominations for the ANRP Awards for 2021 will open in just a few weeks on the 1st of September. A nomination deadline is 22nd of November, immediately after the IETF 109 meeting. If you've read any good applied networking research papers recently, I would very much encourage you to nominate. The URL on the website will have details from the 1st of November. Okay, that's everything from me. Thank you.
Barbara's next. Barbara, you need to request to send audio.
No? Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So the NomCom has started its work. Next slide, please. We had our first call last week, and this is who the seated members are. We had some fun with our seating. You know, we did have a couple of challenges come through, which I have survived, thankfully. And if you have further questions about that, you can always go onto the IETF list, you know, in your spare time and when you just want to have a little fun and read all about that. But I think this is going to be a fabulous group of people. I'm really thrilled that all these people are on the NomCom this year. Next slide, please. And we do have a lot of positions to fill. They just keep growing, although I think it right now it's the same as what Victor had last year, but it is certainly quite a few. And we are going to be starting our meetings next week to get things going with questionnaires and making sure we understand what all the expectations are for each of these seats. And you know, this week I've been meeting with people during NomCom office hours. So next slide, please. So one of the things we did do during our first meeting is set our schedule. There are a couple of dates I really want to highlight for people. The call for nominations we are expecting to have start on August 25th, with questionnaires available on September 1st. Now the interviews and the office hours, I'd like to call your attention to those dates. There are 2 weeks set now for the nominee interviews. We intend to spread them across the 2 weeks prior to IETF 109, whatever format or wherever or however that one may be held. We will be holding the interviews the 2 weeks before. We do realize one of those weeks is a vacation, a common vacation week for many people, but that's why we have 2 weeks. So hopefully that will meet people's needs. We will be having interview slots that are throughout the 24-hour day period. Our NomCom members are from a wide range of time zones themselves, and so we're going to try to have interview slots where both the NomCom interviewer and the nominee are awake at the same time. And we think this is completely doable in our new virtual world, and we expect to be doing our interviews by WebEx. The office hours and request for private office hours during that period of time is going to actually be 3 weeks. So the 2 weeks where we're having interviews, we will have some office hours set, and also the week of IETF 109. We will have some office hours set so that we can get community feedback. So next slide, please. The main thing that we really need is all of you. We need for you to nominate yourself, nominate somebody else, but not as a joke, just because you think they would actually be awesome at the job. And we really need for feedback on the nominees. Yes, we were randomly selected, but we are your randomly selected group of people, and we really need to represent the community, and the way we can best represent the community is if we hear from the community, and if the community members actually stand. And, you know, even if you're going up against an incumbent, I have to say, you know, myself, that just the experience of standing as a nominee is incredible. It's really good, and it really teaches you so much about how IETF operates and what it takes to be a leader within IETF, and to understand what the ADs and the IAB people really go through. I highly recommend the experience. Just, you know, to anybody who wants to understand more about IETF, to stand for a position, and also please give us the feedback. So next slide. So here's some information about us. I don't want to be some aloof IETF NomCom. We are not aloof. We are your NomCom. And, you know, again, I can't stress strongly enough that we really need for you to come and talk to us. The data tracker is where I'm going to be trying to keep the NomCom 2020 page up to date with information about what's going on with us. Our schedule is there, all of the people are there. We currently have 1 office hour still for this week. I set 3. Our first office hour was, we actually had several people come by and provide some input as to qualities they would like to see in some of the positions, you know, that they would like the NomCom to consider when screening candidates and things like that. And we had people asking questions about NomCom and what it takes and things and such. And so we've got the one office hour left on Thursday. I did try to set the 3 office hours at various times of the day so that they were spread widely apart so that people from various regions, again, I really want to try to be inclusive and to be able to represent the entire IETF community. And if you need more from your NomCom, just drop me a note. You know, there's the NomCom email. I've been hanging out in Gather, and I've been having various random conversations where people, you know, even though it's not office hours, when they find me there, some of them bend my ear about NomCom, and that is fine. So just talk to me, people. Okay, and I've already mentioned about the 109 office hours. So next slide, I think, is my thank you. Oh yeah, right. So let's make this, it's a special year already, but let's try and put a positive spin on it. Let's see how we can make it special in a way that really makes things better. I would love to see more nominees and more feedback. And I'd really love to see more diversity in what we have coming at us, from the nominees being diverse, from the feedback coming from people all around. Just, I want to hear from you one way or another. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Next, we have Jay and Jason.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Jay Daly. I'm the IETF Executive Director. I'm going to do first half of the IETF Administration LLC presentation with the LLC Board Chair, Jason Livingood, doing the second part. Next slide, please. And next slide again. So first of all, I'd like to thank the IETF 108 host, Ericsson. It's been very, Ericsson have understood that moving to an online meeting is quite different from an in-person meeting and has different challenges, and they've worked with us to make this a successful meeting. Such things as sponsoring the t-shirts to be delivered to you and other things, and so we're very grateful to them for that. Next slide, please. We've had Akamai as our silver sponsor, who have been very good again, carrying on their sponsorship with us, and ICANN continuing their hackathon sponsorship. We're at the stage now where all our sponsors recognise the value that they get from an online meeting compared to an in-person meeting. So we're managing to roll quite well with our sponsors through to this meeting now. Next slide, please. And for this particular meeting, we had 2 new sets of sponsors. Firstly, the fee waiver sponsors, Google, Fastly and FutureWay. So thanks to them, who've enabled us to pay for large numbers of the fee waivers, which we'll be talking about in a minute. And for Google, Cloud Developer Relations, who have sponsored the Google Cloud service that we're using, that MeetEcho is currently running in. So thank you to those of you as well. Next slide, please. Our equipment sponsors give extraordinarily generously to us, Cisco and Juniper. Thank you very much for that. It's always very nice to have new equipment come every 3 years to maintain things. Next slide, please. And so there are 2 local sponsors from Madrid who I want to thank, who put an enormous amount of work in, even though we haven't used them now. The IPv6 company, or Geordie, as many of you know, and Cult, who are putting circuits in for us and things. So thank you both very much. Even though we didn't use you, you put a lot of work in, and we recognise that. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to read out all of the names, but I thought it was important for you to see just how many people are involved in this, both on the volunteer side here on this slide and on the next slide in terms of staff and contractors. So thank you very much to all of these people. As you can see, we have a large number of people who put their time in to make this work. Thank you. Next slide. So IETF 109 is currently planned for Bangkok, and that will be hosted by Cisco. Thank you very much. As Alyssa has explained earlier, we have a process underway to determine whether or not that can carry on as an in-person meeting or whether we need to switch that to an online meeting. We will find out about that as people give us feedback and as then we then do the assessment in late August. Next slide, please. And finally, I want to thank all of our global hosts so for those of you who don't know, a global host signs up to a multi-year contract with us, 6 or 9 years. They give us money every year throughout that, and they host a number of meetings as part of that. And they have been very helpful in, well, we get an enormous amount of funding from them. We couldn't run the meetings without them. So thank you to Cisco, Comcast, NBC Universal, Ericsson, Huawei, Juniper, and Nokia. Thank you. Next slide, please. So here are our future meeting locations and venues. We have IETF 109 coming up next in Bangkok, as mentioned. March next year is IETF 110 in Prague. Then San Francisco, which is a rescheduled meeting from a previous meeting, and then 112 in Madrid, which is where we're rescheduling this meeting to. We're keeping 113 open in case we need to shift Bangkok to there, and then we have Philadelphia in for 114. And if you are interested in sponsoring a meeting, then please contact us and open up your checkbooks. Fantastic. Next slide, please. So these are the registration numbers as of yesterday when we were preparing the slides, so they're not as up to date as the ones Alyssa gave you. And they're broken down by the type of ticket that we have, and you can see the budget that we have there as well. So for example, we had we budgeted for 500 early birds and we had 485. So it's roughly within line with our budgeting here. We've exceeded the number of registered slightly, so which is very pleasing, but it's good news for us in terms of the financial viability of an online meeting. It has worked out very well. Next slide, please. Now, as a bit of transparency, I've put in here some details about the things that I'm doing as the IETF Executive Director. And you probably guess much of my work has been on number 2 on this, managing the impact of COVID-19 and the switch to a fully online meeting. I'm still relatively new and I still don't get out to meet any of you because we're all in isolated countries. And so the community engagement and support is still a big part of my work here. And there are some other things that I'm working on there. You'll find that if you're interested more in this, that I put significant details into my monthly report that I do for the board meetings, and those are published as part of the board meeting minutes. Next slide, please. So that's it for me, and I'm going to hand over to Jason for the next numbers. It feels like we've still got a very large number of people participating, so it's not as though we've lost anything by people switching to fee waivers or anything like that. And it's been fine to administer, reasonably straightforward, and we haven't done any form of checking or analysis to see if anybody has could have done something else. We've just accepted people on their word for it.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting as we do the post-meeting survey, particularly to see if there are any questions that might be interesting, especially are those new participants, are they new to the IETF and so on. So, thanks. Other questions from folks? Looks like we've got Jim Reed in the queue.
Can I speak?
Yes, go ahead. We can hear you.
Thank you. If the meeting goes ahead in Bangkok, will you be projecting that on a lower attendance rates than you would normally expect to physically show up for the meeting?
I'll pick that up then, Jason. It's a good question, Jim. So our assessment process is effectively a two-step one, where we determine whether or not it's viable for the meeting to go ahead, and then the IESG determines whether there are sufficient numbers for people to go ahead. I haven't done extensive work, well, any work particularly on what the numbers would be if we went ahead with an in-person meeting yet. That's part of the assessment process that I do at the end of August, and that's when I would have a better answer for that question, because that's when we look at travel bans and various other things like that.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea to try and get a survey of how many people would be prepared to go to Bangkok, assuming their employer would let them.
Yeah, if that's our second stage. So if the first stage is that we think it is viable to hold a meeting there, then we would probably go to that as a second stage. I think you can make your own judgment on what the first stage is likely to deliver that.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
But Jim, good point about employer travel. I know many companies that send IETF participants to meetings have travel restrictions in place, so that may be a factor. And of course, we're seeing a lot of resurgence globally. So we'll see. Looks like we've got another person in queue.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me, Jason?
We can indeed, thanks.
Fantastic. It's also related to IETF 109, just really 2 quick points. First is just adding to Jim's point. At the moment, I'm concerned about the availability of travel insurance. So even if it's possible to go, I think it might be quite challenging to get travel insurance, which I think will be an issue for some of us. And also, I've noticed, as I'm sure you have, that we're starting to see some pretty big high-profile events for early next year moving to virtual. You would have seen that, I'm sure, the notice about CES in January going to be virtual. So personal view, I think the practicalities of doing face-to-face events in November are extremely questionable, but that's just my opinion.
Very good point. Thanks for the input. Looks like we've got another person in the queue.
Oops. Huh.
I think we can hear you.
Oh, you can? Okay. I thought I
Yes.
got bounced out.
No.
I do love this Meet Echo tool, though, really. My question is, let's assume maybe we have uncertainty about different people's travel, or maybe some people just really liked the really intensive online. Can we consider, maybe you already have said this, having a full-on Meet Echo presence that empowers the remote people as well as in person?
Jay, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think that is probably tied up into the work going on in SHMU about what people want for online meetings, even though it's related to in-person. I'm not convinced that it's sensible for us in the LLC to go ahead and start making some decisions about the meeting process in that way, or the meeting experience in that way. That's something more for the IESG and others to do, and that's the process currently, is to go through that. So tweaks and other things, yes, but if you're talking about a major overhaul of the way that the interaction between in-person and online takes place, and I think that requires community guidance to help us understand how to deliver that.
Yeah. But that being said, Jay, just to add to that, I mean, I think it's certainly the case, whether you look at our online meeting tools or other online collaboration tools, I think everyone's expectations as a result of working remotely from the pandemic have really increased quite a bit. And so, it's important for us to step up our tooling. And I do want to make a mention here of the Meet Echo team. I mean, the work that they've done has been phenomenal, and really, really appreciate the quick development and turnaround on a lot of the features. So really nice work.
This one.
Any other questions in queue?
Can I jump in real quick on this one? Or
of course, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, Allison, that there's like a really wide array of opinions about this question, which is just to reinforce what Jay said, like why the SHMU process is so important. Like, there's people who never want to have a plenary meeting again, and then all the way to emphasizing the face-to-face and sort of the model that we were going with before, and everything in between. So we really need to kind of try to coalesce around what the model or models is that the bulk of the community is interested in, because in the absence of that, we just have to like make a guess or make a choice one way or the other without you know, having a good sense of what the community wants.
Great, thanks. Anyone else in queue? Doesn't look like it. So I think thank you very much. Appreciate your time for the LLC Q&A period. Move on to the next one.
All right, thanks. So the next one is going to be the IESG, and we're going to do a quick round of introductions, just so people can hear our voices and see our faces, hopefully. So Alvaro, go ahead.
Hi, Alvaro Retano.
Deborah? Deborah, if you're speaking, we cannot hear you. Okay, maybe we'll come back to Deborah. Martin?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Just lost complete internet connection. So Martin Vigore speaking, routing AD.
Okay, Murray's next.
Murray Kucheravi, applications in real time.
Applications in real time.
Thanks, Barry. Roman?
Roman Danilio, security area.
And I'm Ben Kaduk, security area.
Martin Duke, transport area.
Transport.
Rob Wilton, ops area, focus on management.
Hey, I'm Warren Kamari. I'm the operations.
Yes, I apologize if I didn't actually respond to your email, because that is being actively investigated. We're trying to figure out what the problem is on our side. So
yeah, I have a suspicion. So if somebody who is investigated reaches to me directly, I can give a clue and we can go on from there.
Yeah, we will. I'll get back to you after the plenary. I apologize for not responding.
Thanks a lot.
Right in the run up to the IETF. Yeah, no worries. Okay, I think Pete is next.
Hello there. So I noticed a thread on the IETF list that's gotten kind of long. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that thread. So a couple of quick things. First, John, I think, made a comment on the list that the last minute nature of the IESG statement was probably a little problematic, and lesson learned, but I agree that the timing should be a little earlier before a meeting, and a request that folks who are participating in that thread take a beat and remain a little calm. It's a controversial topic. It's bound to get snippy, and so people need to be a little more empathetic with others and maybe talk to folks offline and not assume that they're just being idiots. But all that said, the reason that I bothered to get in the mic line is a request to the IESG. If you've got a controversial topic coming out, and I don't think any of the IESG members were surprised that this one was going to be controversial, it would be really good to stick someone on the IESG or someone that they choose with the task of managing the discussion and occasionally inserting a, okay, we've heard this, and here's what we've heard out of the conversation, because without that, people have a tendency to repeat themselves, and it's become non-useful and, for some folks, unreadable. And I hope that we could get that in the future. Thanks.
Pete, and I think that was Pete Resnick for people who couldn't discern. If you can state your name when you come to the mic, that's helpful. So I'll just give my own response and let other people chime in. But from my perspective, I haven't seen the message about the statement being last minute, but I frankly think it's like decades overdue. So I don't find it to be last minute at all. We should have done it a long time ago. And it wasn't really in relation to the meeting necessarily.
Just to comment on that, Alyssa, it wasn't a question of whether it should have been done sooner or later, but more that 3 days before the IETF meeting made it such that it sort of blew up and there was a lot of other things going on. Not that it shouldn't have been as soon as possible. That's exactly right. It's quite a bit too late, but just that timing it right near the meeting was tricky and made the conversation, and I think IESG involvement in that conversation, harder. That's all. Okay. I mean, I feel that people maybe need to reread the statement because the first paragraph is like a statement of what the IESG believes, and I understand that there's like lots of effort to try to influence us about what we believe, but it's just a statement of belief. And if people wanted to comment on that, that's their prerogative. But it wasn't necessarily like inviting us to comment back. It's just a statement of our belief. And the second paragraph talks about like welcoming further discussion in the community in the structured way that we have it towards the draft and gen dispatch. So I can appreciate that. There's nothing that we can do to prevent people from starting a thread on IETF at IETF, but if you actually read the words in the statement, I think they tell you something different from what people have been reading into them. Warren, I don't know if you actually want to speak or not. Did you want to jump in?
The controls are muddled.
I don't think Warren is trying to speak. And I'm not seeing anybody else piping up, so I think we can move on to the next question. Andrew.
With apologies, but I just want to go back to the point that Pete made. The timing of pushing out that statement literally just a handful of days before an IETF meeting was especially unhelpful, given it was quite predictable the volume of responses it generated. Which meant that the volume of noise coming from the various mailing lists quickly became unmanageable. It became a distraction rather than having a much more constructive discussion about what ought to be an important topic. So I think that the timing was at best unfortunate. I'd urge people to reflect in future for such announcements to not put them out just before an IETF meeting.
Okay, Rich.
I think it's going to be a noise fest no matter when it happens, and having it just when people's minds are focused on the IETF and publications of documents seems reasonable to me. Yeah, it's going to be unfortunate whenever it is. I speak from experience. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the IESG? Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, just as a Jabber scribe, there's two questions I see in the the chat room. The most recent one is the RFC editor has a long backlog. Who will fix that? And there was a previous one that I've lost in the chat, but it was a question about the NomCom. Are all the incumbents running again? So the two questions for the group.
Okay. Barry, would you like to respond?
Generally, by the time the requests go out for volunteers for the NomCom selected positions, some of us have declared whether we'll be standing again or not, and the NomCom chair will announce that with the solicitation of volunteers. Sometimes incumbents decide after people have started to put their names in. But generally, the NomCom chair lets the community know as soon as the incumbents have declared whether they'll be standing again. And I'll say for me, I do not intend to stand for Art AD again. And I hope the art area will put forth a number of good candidates, including the ones who stood last time.
Thanks, Barry. So to the first question, there's a few compounding factors that have affected the length of the RFC editor's queue. The main one that's still in play right now is something called Cluster 238, which is the group of 40 or so documents that are defining the WebRTC protocol suite and have a web of interdependencies that have caused them to all hit the publication queue at once. So about half of those are finished with Auth 48, and about half of them still need to complete Auth 48. So hopefully when that cluster is done, well, certainly like the length of the queue in terms of the number of documents will be dramatically shortened when all of those are finished. I think optimistically by the end of the year, let's say. So that will be a significant help. The other thing that's ongoing that's affecting the time in queue is the transition to the v3 RFC format, which started in October of last year, and I think the bulk of the issues that surfaced with the transition have been ironed out. But I think if John Levine is with us, he can give more of an update when the IAB comes on. But we're getting to the place where we at least know the length of time that editing a v3 page of a document takes. So that's getting smoothed out. So next, unless I don't see anybody else from the IESG who wants to respond. So I think next in queue we have Ron. So I cannot hear Ron. Can others hear Ron?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, sorry. I'd like to recommend that draft authors run their text through a tool like Grammarly or Hemingway or ProWritingAid to get it in pretty good shape while it's being reviewed. So that way, the poor RFC editor won't have to, go crazy with grammatical stuff that could have been taken care of by a piece of software. And it might even be a good idea if the IESG would recommend some tools that get to a style that they like to see.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Thank you. Barbara is next.
I just wanted to say briefly that independent of whether or not any of these wonderful people decide to run again for the meetings.
Barbara, if you're sending audio, you're very faint.
Well, maybe it would help if I put my microphone in front of my mouth. Thank you, Alyssa. So as the NomCom chair, I would just like to, encourage that independent of whether any of these wonderful people will be running again for the IESG, I would love to see people running against them. Competition in things like this is really a good thing. I think it encourages us all to be our better selves and to try to do better. And so I don't think people should ask whether or not somebody else is running before they put their name in the hat. And even if they don't get the position, again, the experience is really good to have. So thanks.
Okay, Michael is next.
Yes, I'm job describing for Kathleen, who asks if anything is being done to increase the rate of output for the IESG queue for publication. She asked AD review expectations, understanding that holding documents up holds up real work progress, etc. And I guess John also said that some of the RFC editor questions will happen in the IEB part that was asked.
Okay. Anyone on the IESG want to speak to this one?
Yeah, so I know that at least for me, the queue of documents for AD review is getting pretty long. And we have been trying to do some things to speed that up. I was able to request that my IESG colleagues take over a few of the documents that were sent to me pretty shortly after they were sent to me, to sort of short circuit my very long queue and get it to someone who could handle it a lot quicker. And that seems to have been pretty effective. So I think we're going to keep in mind the ability to do that in the future. We have a standing item on our informal telechats to ask if there's any documents that we should switch around. And again, speaking only for myself, I expect to be making better progress with my own queue in the coming months.
All right. Barry, did you want to respond?
It's really helpful for the document shepherds to keep up on this also. And if we are not responding quickly enough, that's part of what the document shepherds are supposed to be doing, is ping us and ask what the delay is, if there's anything you can do to help us. And sometimes just a reminder is what we need to push it up in our queue and get it going.
Warren, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Right. Hold on. Oh yeah, I just want to kind of second what Barry said. It's also, if you're a draft author, please make sure that you actually integrate comments when you get comments back. And also, if you're not getting a response, make sure you just ping the AD. Often you get huge numbers of email in your email box, and you might miss one. So if you're waiting on an AD to do something, please just ping them and make sure, or ping them to make sure that they haven't lost track of it, etc.
All right. I think we will move on to David.
Thank you. Alyssa, can you hear me? You're muted, but I'm going to assume that it's working. David Skenazy, Google. Just on the topic of lengthy reviews with the IESG, I would just like to offer a suggestion for IESG members. I've had experience with a bunch of documents where we've gotten like very long and thorough review from the IESG, which is great and helpful. But I'm thinking maybe it is not in the best interest of the IESG to spend so much time on editorial comments on documents. In particular, I've had instances where one AD made acknowledged editorial comments. I made the changes, and then another AD submitted editorial comments that directly contradicted those changes. All that to say, I think there is value in having the IESG, review the documents and make sure, like, for example, it has valid security. But let's maybe shorten the reviews and not like nitpick everything editorially. We have the RFC editor that can do this. Just a thought.
And go ahead.
I'm not sure if Warren was also trying to speak up as well, but just my own response to David is that I have actually asked the RFC editor directly maybe a year or two ago about what their stance is on getting, on I guess, leaving editorial issues to the RFC editor. And the response I got was, please report editorial issues with the document as early as you can. And for many of these documents, I'm not reading them until IESG evaluation. And so that's like the earliest chance that I have to make this sort of comments. I do want to reiterate that the IESG ballots have a comment section, which is usually present on most of the things you get email about. There's also sometimes the discuss section, of course, which has the blocking comments. But the comment section on the ballot is explicitly non-blocking comments, and by putting remarks in there, we're sort of saying, we are okay if you completely ignore this. Some of them we may really want you to pay attention to and do something in response to, but if you completely ignore them, we're not supposed to get put out or anything because of it. It is, after all, just a comment.
Yeah, and this is Warren. I mean, ideally, things like editorial nits would be caught in working group last call or IETF last call or before it hits the IESG. But I know that my ADHD/OCD won't really let me just ignore a bunch of typos, editorial things without mentioning them. But as Ben said, most of them do just end up in the comment section unless it's something which is a significant enough issue to be a discuss. There is also the fact that the RFC editor has a lot of work to do, and there's a definite cost with it. If we can make the document not have 27 typos before it hits them, I think that that's always helpful. Or is that's not actually what exactly we're talking about, but there are a lot of documents that show up just with monster big typos or basically unreadable. Sorry, I'm sounding grumpy.
Did you want to respond as well? Oh.
Yeah, maybe my mic is hot. So, David, I just wanted to acknowledge, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we as the IESG can do a better job on is making sure that we don't duplicate feedback, whether it comes in discuss form or in comments if there's nothing new to add. So this is, I think, an artifact that different IESG members have different workflows about whether they read other people's comments, then they provide theirs, or where their starting point is. But we can try harder at that. That's fair. Thanks.
Okay, I think we are good with that one, so we will move on to Mark.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes. The little bars are moving. Mark Nottingham. So I want to follow on to the last discussion. Ben, you said you talked to the RFC editor. I'd encourage you to talk to authors. The experience of an author putting a document together, going through working group last call, then going through IETF last call, then going through the RFC editor is onerous, especially for new authors. And when they get a tremendous amount of very detailed feedback from the IESG about grammatical issues, and sometimes it conflicts with what the RFC editor says. I've seen that happen. And then they have to go through the same process with the RFC editor. It's not really a great experience, especially when the feedback comes in a huge slab of an email where you have to go and find the right part of the document to edit and then affect that edit and then go through the whole thing. At least with the RFC editor, it's much more automated and they do the work for you. I'd really encourage you to think about what the editor experience is here, especially since so many working groups are using more modern tools like GitHub, and you could give them a pull request, for example. And the statement that, you know, comments can be ignored, yes, I've heard that said a number of times. I've been working in the IETF now for 20 years, and I still don't feel like I can ignore comments from an AD. It just, to a new author, that just won't even enter their mind. So I really encourage the ISG to think about how the time spent here. If we're really doing this to save time and money from the RFC editor, then there's something really broken going on, and I hope that's not the motivation.
Hey, Mark, thanks. That's definitely a great point, and I'm glad that you mentioned people who are using a GitHub-based workflow. I do try to check for if there's a document using GitHub and make a pull request for the boring editorial stuff. I guess I'd more reliably do that when it's a document at AD review than an ISG evaluation, but I definitely do try. So that's a great point. I think, speaking just for myself, it's not really an attempt to save the money or time from the RPC staff. It's more that I have this problem where I notice things, and by the time I've noticed the thing and gotten past it while I'm just reading for my own comprehension, the incremental time to note it and get it fixed is not very much for me, but I will definitely try and consider the effect on the authors in the future.
Yeah, this is Warren. I guess I'll largely just follow in from what Ben said. Once I've noticed in it, it's really, really hard not to comment on it and just leave it lie. But also, you might be making a generalization there, Mark. I recently published a document and I got a bunch of editorial comments back during ISG review, and I thought they were really helpful and friendly. You know, I went through, I integrated them. Almost always there's other stuff one has to integrate after the IESG review. And so while I had the document open, going through and fixing the typos that I accidentally left in, changing things like DNS revolver to DNS resolver, I think was really helpful. And it's the sort of thing that the RFC editor might miss. I'd rather fix things like that while I've got the document open than end up having an errata because of a typo.
Okay. Next is John.
I want to reinforce a lot of what Mark said, and to repeat a comment which has been made in the chat, which is that when it's coming from the ISG, treating comments that show up in the post last call process as just comments, ignoring them is hard for very experienced participants and probably impossible for newcomers. But what I wanted to say was to make a vague suggestion for the ISG to think about. 25 years ago when I was on the ISG, probably too long for anybody else to remember, we used to view the ISG catching problems which survived working groups and last calls and now document shepherds in between working groups and last calls. When something got that far and no comments were raised and the ISG hadn't noticed them, we treated it as a process failure. Not something to scream at somebody about, but something to think about what could have been done differently, which would have prevented the ISG from needing to catch and deal with those comments at the last minute. If the ISG feels like they need to lodge discussions against the document, that's an indication that something somewhere along the line in the process failed and failed fairly seriously. And I'm not suggesting you shouldn't act as a final check in that regard, but I am suggesting that maybe it's time to go back and think about ways of doing a post-mortem, a re-examination of what caused the document to get to the ISG in the shape in which the ISG feels like they need to make a serious protest. and that applies equally well to editorial issues, to language which we no longer approve of and should not have approved of 20 years ago, or whether it's a technical problem. Just a suggestion for you to collectively to think about. Thanks. Boy, that got resounding silence.
No, I'm not sure if I needed to be called or I was moved to the talking queue. Sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
please begin.
Yeah. So we have a discussion about the length of the Meet Echo time slots on the working group chairs mailing list, and given how they, I think, really the time management and how the working group chairs serve at the demand of the IESG, I think it would be good for the IESG to start thinking about how in future virtual meetings we're managing the time there. Right now it was starts on the clock, ends on the clock, and then basically people started to argue for 5 more minutes, and I think I'm voting on the side of having a lot more leeway on that working group chairs can ask if people can stay over. I mean, it's not as if the next working group rushes in, but attendees can easily say, no, we've got a conflict or we don't have a conflict, right? So I think we have a lot more flexibility nowadays, but we're actually in the tooling side rather going the opposite way. So would be great if IESG could get involved, given how it's probably a good part of your responsibility to manage that.
Yeah, thanks. I agree. I think this is a place we can make a lot of improvement. I do think, having the start times fairly strict is important in terms of making sure that everybody who wants to get to a session can get to it. So I don't think we want the sessions to bleed into each other. Even if there's, a core group who can keep talking, that's a little bit exclusionary towards people who have another commitment. But yeah, the lead times on either side is something we need to work on, and I don't know. I think we have the feedback on the working group chairs list. It's possible we might add something to the meeting survey just to get a sense from people of what they're looking for. So,
well, I mean, there's a good point about 30 minutes in before for testing, right? So like when rooms are open, that people come in. Obviously, there is no official program, but all the side discussion before, and then. If we can stay afterwards, at least until the next meeting is officially scheduled, right, when there are breaks, and otherwise, right, there is a total miss of using the same tooling to having ad hoc, working group side meetings when you see that you're running over. We had those easily in the past when there were rooms available, right? So there are always more options that we currently don't have with MeetEcho.
Yep, point taken. Thank you, Sam. Sam, if you're speaking, I cannot hear you. Try one more time. Okay, it looks like Sam is having some difficulty, so we'll come back to you, Sam, if you can get it sorted out, and we'll move on to Ted. Seems like we're having similar permission issue with Ted, perhaps. All I see is people like appearing and disappearing from the queue.
This is finally working, it looks like.
Yes,
I want to go
I can hear you.
I want to go back to document editing. As I think about my own RFCs, the RFC editor edits with an extremely light touch. And when I think about the documents that I've reviewed at last call, I think that many of them would benefit from far more significant editing than I typically see the RFC editor do. And so if authors don't want that sort of editing to happen, or those sort of comments to come in at last call or during IESG review, my suggestion is that they or their working groups send us better documents and do a stronger editing pass at the working group, even if it means assigning an additional person to edit the document.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Not seeing anyone from the ISG piping in, so I think we will move on to Jonathan.
All right, so so at the in the in-person meetings, our meetings have always been in quanta of half hours, so hour and a half, 2 hours. In this meeting, it was 50 minutes or 100 minutes instead. And I feel like, especially given the friction of AB troubles, that's a little tight. My group didn't need a full, wouldn't need a full hour and a half. So I thought, well, I guess I'll have to do 50 minutes, but it's turned out to be sort of tight for me. So I think that going forward, assuming we're still going to do virtual, half-hour quanta, in my opinion, rather than 25-minute quanta would work better, just as my personal opinion. So.
Okay, thank you. That's good feedback. It's a little tricky because we're trying to keep the whole day short due to time zones, but it's good feedback. Anyone else in the queue? Ted, are you going to make another run at it, or anybody else? Okay, looks like no. So, Barry?
Yeah, there's a question in Jabber from KHA. He says, request IESG to also consider what new terminology drafts/RFCs are introducing, and is it necessary? Preference should be not to add new pixie dust all the time to make contributions look cool.
Okay. Not sure that I really followed that, but if somebody else did and wants to respond. Okay. I guess if this is about the terminology draft, maybe send an email to Gen Dispatch and we can try to follow it up. Oh, Ben, did you have?
Yeah, if I understood the question correctly, it was to say that whenever we have a new technology draft in front of us, we should take a close look to see if it is defining new terms that are not needed, that there are existing terms that could be used and work just fine. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable point. We should not define new terms just because we can and limit that to just when there's a particular need for it. Also, it looks like Ted Lemon did manage to put into the Jabber what he was intending to say at the mic. If I can get back to it in my history. Okay, yes, he was going to say that we have a process for announcing interim meetings, and having the working group meetings go long without that being on the schedule would violate the 2-week notice process.
Okay, that's just a statement.
It looks like it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that seems true. Other responses from IESG? No. Okay. John is next.
With regard to that terminology comment, I agree. And I agree with Ben's excellent summary that we shouldn't be adding new terms we don't need to. But again, this is something which shouldn't fall on the ISG. if an IETF last call is meaningful, then people should be reading these documents during last call and raising these terminology objections long before it falls on the ISG to notice these things and sort them out. So I think we're putting too much responsibility on the ISG, which is making things too burdensome and is vastly increasing the stress on authors relative to catching these things earlier and dealing with them during the normal course of document development.
Okay, Ben, did you want to respond back?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to respond back with another question. And I think there was some discussion in the chat as well about hoping that we did not have to go to a place where we had explicit signed reviews of the document to confirm that it actually got read. And so my question back to John would be, do you think that the ISG should be putting discusses on documents for process failure if it seems that the document has not actually been reviewed by the IETF during the last call?
Especially for working group documents. If it looks like that those documents got into last call without adequate review and then got no review on the last call, I would expect the responsible area director to bounce that document before it even goes into ISG review. Now that's an answer to a little different question, but yes, I think we are taking, the whole community is taking IETF last call much less seriously than we did even a decade ago, much less a decade or 2.5. And I think we need to try to figure out a way to ameliorate that. And if the community doesn't care enough about a document to carefully review it, then we don't have IETF consensus for that document, no matter what IESG reviews or other rituals we go to. And we really need to start taking that problem seriously.
That's a fair point. I don't think I can disagree with what you say there. So I'm hopeful that we can get consensus in the community about the right approach.
Yeah, I'd much rather have a discussion in the ISG and in the community about what that right approach is, rather than try to work it out on this call. And I don't think I've got I've got ideas which are any better than anybody else's, but I'm certainly noticing the problem.
Follow up?
Whether you called on me, but here I am anyway. This is Barry Leva. John, back when dinosaurs roamed the internet, we had people who were, we had many fewer documents going into last call. We had people who were more broadly scoped, more people who were more broadly scoped. We have a much more focused group of people now, and I think it has been difficult to get a lot of last call comments. I would love to see many more last call comments. I think the directorates and area review teams have helped somewhat in that regard because we at least push a few last call reviews. We hope that most of the work will be done in the working groups and that last call will surface a relatively small number of comments that gives us the cross area review. But it is a very difficult problem, and I'd love to see much more interaction, much more engagement in the community with last call. So I agree with that point.
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with anything you've said, and it's speaking as one of the residual dinosaurs. But at the same time, when we make very broad claims for IETF consensus, that presumes an informed review somewhere. And to the extent to which we're not getting it, we're risking the IETF's credibility, as well as, again, putting far more pressure on the ISG's members to act as overall supervisors of the technical quality of work, which we can't reasonably expect all of them to understand all of the time. And we need to figure out a way to work on that a little bit. And certainly, as Stuart just said in the chat, for one of these documents to get even into last call without evidence, the responsible ID has read it carefully is a bad sign.
Warren, did you want to respond?
Yep. So I mean, there's not very much I can say other than just to agree with Barry and John. The problem is, from looking at our consensus processes, there's you have to make sure that all of the outstanding comments are addressed. There's very little that says that there has to be a good, strong show of support or how one judges that level of support. Actually recently went through to try and find, a document that says you need at least N people saying that this is a good idea, or very strong levels of support, and I couldn't find that document in order to point at. So A, if somebody has that would be really helpful, and B, maybe we need to sort of change our worldview. So instead of there's consensus when you've addressed all of the outstanding comments and everybody stopped complaining, to we need much stronger shows of support from a working group before the chairs are sort of willing to send the document forward. And more, a lack of comments in IETF last call does not mean that there's consensus. It either means that nobody's read the document, or maybe everybody fully agrees, but that seems unlikely. I suspect this is better a conversation we should have offline, where we can have it on a mailing list, and hopefully a lot of people will comment and review.
So technically we have 6 minutes left, although the session will stay up if we run over. We have 5 people in queue. Now we have 4 people in queue, and we haven't done the IAB open mic yet. So please keep your comments and responses brief. Dominique.
Thanks. The TECO meetings have been going really well, and I've been really impressed with them. Just a quick question about the virtual hum. Is there like a minimum number of people that need to participate, or minimum volume, and also how are people finding it in general? Because there's been a couple where people are not quite sure what to do. Thanks.
Go ahead, Martin.
A measure the bins. There's a draft about this in Shmoo. If you're interested in the spec,
Want to restart? Your audio was cutting off. You might want to restart your comments.
Oh, great. Okay, well, let's try that again. So first of all, it will show up as Niente.
Okay, I think we lost Martin. And perhaps what he was saying is that there's no hums. It will show up as Niente. So there's a bucket that captures very low or no humming. And if you have feedback about the tool, please send it to Tools Discuss at IETF. That's where we're having discussion about it. And I think opinions vary, so please bring yours to the Tools discussion list. And we will move on to Torless.
Yeah, was with respect to the last call, right? I think maybe it's also an issue of the document shepherds and the working group chairs maybe trying to initiate before the end of the last call, cross review in wherever there might be feeling of the most useful additional feedback, or even earlier than the last call. And I think maybe that needs to be exercised more from my own experience. And I think I'm to blame there as well, not doing that enough.
Warren, did you have a response?
So I kind of think this one virtual events discussions in the chamber. I think one of the problems is that there are authors who push really strongly for their document to go to working group last call, and the chairs are willing to push back for a while. But after 5 or 6 or 7 times of, but my document's ready for working group last call, nobody's read it. But my document's ready for working group last call, nobody's read it. Eventually, it just becomes easier for the working group chairs to say, okay, whatever, let's just push this up to the IESG. And I don't really know how we can fight that. I mean, chairs are volunteers. At some point, after they've been shouted at enough times by authors, it just becomes easier to say, all right, whatever, I will kick this up to someone else and make it their problem. I think the only legitimate way to try and fix that is for everybody who participates to either be willing to read and comment on drafts, even if they don't find them interesting, or to provide support to the chairs when the chairs say, author X has said 17 times now that they think the document has consensus. Can people please read it and comment? So I think this is sort of a problem that lies with all of us. Chairs need support as well. If authors are pushing on chairs and you're a working group participant, please feel free to sort of help the chair push back. Obviously, not all of them need it, but sometimes it is helpful.
Well, so my experience with a document that had many pieces of, with expertise from different areas was that, if would have found a way to earlier, try to ask strongly for a review from expert in these other working groups on the specific parts, that could have sped up the process, right? Because so it's really all in IESG and IEEE review that this is all backloaded, right? And I'm just saying that we could attempt to have these out of working group reviews earlier on, right? Because I think you're right that there will not be more review from the working group itself, but if the review from people outside of the working group comes before it goes through last call, there is probably a better chance to get better resolution than in the rush and publish phase, which IETF and IESG review often is.
Yep. Just to be clear, I wasn't actually commenting on any specific draft. Just to
yeah.
Okay, thanks. Phil?
Yeah,
are you able to speak?
I was just going to address John's point earlier. Yes, things were different 25 years ago, and so were the drafts that we're producing then. And since then, we've got strong security requirements that have to be passed, strong NIST IANA requirements. We've put a whole set of requirements on the that have improved the quality of the drafts. But the other thing that we've done that's probably changed the process is there are a lot of cases where you need to get a registration, and we've made RFC required or documentation required, which ends up being, well, it's got to be an RFC. And when we discuss things like making internet drafts permanent, etc., and when we had that whole RFC process, one of the things that I don't think was really clearly addressed there was that if you're going to make the threshold an RFC is required because that's the only thing that is permanent, then what you end up doing is forcing a lot of stuff to go through the IESG that perhaps never needed to go through there in the first place, because all that somebody wanted was a code point for their idea that maybe if it just, we gave them the code point and they went away and it died afterwards, wouldn't have bothered anybody. So we're creating work by insisting on processes that are a bit pathological.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of truth in that. the extensiveness of the review is clearly tied to what you say. So, okay, I'm not seeing anyone else in the IESG who wants to respond. And given the time, I think we're going to move on to the IAB open mic since we're already over time for this session. So we will move on to that.
Okay, so we will also start with an introduction round.
Hi, I'm Alyssa. I'm on the IAB ex officio.
Hi, I'm Colin Perkins. I'm the IRTF chair.
I work for Akamai on the IAB.
Colin, if you can try. Yeah, Colin has problems, so we go on with Yari.
I'm Jari Arkko, member of the IAB.
Jeff?
Jeff Sarah, member of IAB.
Jian Khan? We can't hear you, Jian Khan. Now, maybe. Try again.
Hello. Jian Kang Yao. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I'm Jian Kang Yao, IIB.
John? Take John later, so we go for Mark.
Got kicked.
Okay, now we have John. Let's go for John first. Sorry.
Hi there. I'm John Levine. I'm the acting RFC sort of series editor.
Thank you. I don't see Mark, so we go for Stephen.
Stephen Barrow, just snuck in here.
Tommy?
Hello, I'm Tommy Polly, IAB.
Sardiker, I'm on the IAB and also the guides lead.
Chanbin?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Jamili, IAB.
Okay, and now let's try for Colin.
IB, if you can hear me this time.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Colin Jenks, IB. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think we're still missing Mark. I mean, I know he's here. Maybe he also has trouble connecting. So that's Mark Nottingham missing. And I'm Mia Kuhlmann, I'm the IB chair. And I believe that's everybody. So we can start the open mic. I guess we already exhausted all the questions in the previous round, or people just want to go, don't want to go home, they just want in. Okay, we have John.
Just apropos of some of the questions that were asked in the last round about slow documents. I don't have a whole lot to add to what Alyssa and the other people said. Cluster 238 totally screwed up our schedule because essentially 45 documents were basically thrown into a bucket over the past 4 years and then dropped back into the queue all at the same time, which caused a huge backlog in the past couple of months. The production people have been working diligently. They're mostly all in off 38 or better, off 48 or better. And it seems likely that most of them will be published by next month. Beyond that, the switch to XML documents was very disruptive. I mean, partly it meant that everybody had to learn new tools. Partly it means we now have new permanent jobs we have to do. And in particular, in the V3 XML, it's full of semantic tagging, which is great, but it means that somebody actually has to do the semantic tagging. And if the authors don't do it, which at this point, many are not, the RPC has to go through and do the semantic tagging too. And there's some, I'm attempting to look at how can we make our tools better. Here, let me take this off. How can we make our tools better? And also, can we encourage people to submit stuff in V3 with the tags pretty much in place, which will save a fair amount of time. And also on the back end, I know a lot of people want to use GitHub for Auth48 and other stuff. We have an experiment doing that. None of us are opposed to it. We're just worried that using GitHub can subject people to an enormous blizzard of comments and remarks and pull requests and issues and stuff. And we're trying to figure out how to do this in a disciplined way so that the editors get the notices they need to respond to without having to wade through a lot of stuff that they don't. The current experiment looks really promising, but I think we have a fair amount of work to do. And just finally, just on my personal viewpoint, I think I would want to be willing to push back a little more when a document shows up that clearly needs a lot of work. That I would like the RFC editor, whoever it turns out to be, to continue to have the realistic authority to say this document needs to go back and have more work from the working group before it's ready to edit, just because it's not well enough written, or there's too much obvious changes that it needs. So we have plenty of work to do, and I look forward to doing it all with you.
Thank you for the more extensive report here. We still have the opportunity for questions for the IAB or for John. I don't think I see anybody. So that means we're only 10 minutes over, which is pretty good, I think. And I will hand back to Alyssa for final words.
No final words. I think we are done. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.